Hello and welcome to the Nordic Baltic Topics News Roundup. And with me today, Victor Kubik from the Kubik Report. I'm James Ginn. Welcome, Victor. How are you today?
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Good to be on here with you again. I appreciate these podcasts and times with you.
I'll tell you what, since we've done our last podcast, the world has changed. There's been a lot of things going on, and it seems like not a week goes by without something earth-shattering taking place. So glad to be able to get on here and discuss it with you and give a perspective to our listeners that maybe they haven't heard anywhere else.
I know, and we're just all very, very moved not only by what's happening in the world, but how it affects us personally, since some of us have nationality backgrounds to those parts of the world.
The big news, and now it's been a week or so, a little over a week ago, whenever President Zelensky went to Washington, D.C. and had a meeting with President Trump and, of course, Vice President Vance interjected some things that Zelensky took some issue with and had some questions for the Vice President. And then we know how that all deteriorated very quickly and ended up with the President and the Vice President really treating Zelensky in a very childish, bullying sort of schoolyard kind of way. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, as someone who spends, or since I don't know, about 2010, I guess I've spent about half of my time in the country, half of the time out of the country of the United States, roughly. I mean, not exactly, but you get a perspective from an international perspective, and I realized immediately this is going to be a major moment in history. We're going to look back in history at this event. And we're going to say this is what changed the world, and that seems to be the case. And in fact, I thought it might take a little longer than it did. But I mean, before the weekend was over, this was on a Friday. Before the weekend was over, we had the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, come out and say, "Hey, you know what? It's time we rearm Europe." We had the vice president of the commission, of course, Kaja Kallas, come out and say, "You know what? The United States has shown, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, they're no longer fit to lead the world, and the democracy in the world, the free world, I think is the word she used, needs new leadership, and Europe is ready to step up." What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is that it's just very tragic to see what's happening to the way the world feels about the United States. We talked about the United States before this incident not being loved by a lot of parts of the world. And if we think that this is going to change the way the world feels, yes, it will, for worse. They'll disrespect us even more. They look upon us as ruffians, cowboys, and people who are immature, who have a low emotional quotient, who don't understand politics. In fact, in listening to Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, you have people who speak cogently, logically, sensibly. And I just hate to be one to cheer them on, because knowing how prophetically Europe may become, it's frightening to see these people that are sounding so sensible reacting toward the United States. And since that incident with Zelensky being kicked around like a little puppet there between those big tough guys, things haven't gone very well. Now they're talking again, but I'm not sure where it's all going to end up.
Right, and there will be people who, of course, are loyal, diehard supporters of President Trump, and of course, we sort of take a view that we don't really get into supporting one political candidate over the other. So Trump, we give him credit where credit is due. He's done some good things and continues to do some good things for the United States. But this situation, in isolation here, just taking this particular situation, it was a terrible move for foreign policy in for the United States. And what happened now is not only is Europe looking at a very negative light to the United States and saying we can't rely on the United States. We've got Russia on one side and the United States on another, and we have to do something to defend ourselves against both, potentially. But we've united Europe in a way that Europe has never been united, at least in my lifetime. And we've united Canada against us, one of our closest friends and loyal allies. And what we're seeing is countries that were very friendly to us are now being very friendly to each other and excluding us. In fact, I saw just a few days ago where the Ursula von der Leyen, they had a meeting in Europe, and she called and said, I'm going to brief our friends. And she briefed countries like Canada and other countries, but the United States is not one of those countries.
Huh. You mean she left it out?
Yes.
Wow.
So, interesting developments, and just kind of looking at what's going on over there, because I think a lot of people don't realize what's happening, and we'll talk a little bit about the biblically prophetic significance of it, because I think a lot of people are absolutely blind to that perspective. Particularly today, people are biblically illiterate, and they just don't follow it. They don't know. They don't realize that the Bible is full of prophecy that has been fulfilled over the years. Step by step, since it was written, things that it foretold would happen, and they've come about, and they've happened exactly the way the Bible indicated it. And it talks about what's going on right now. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But just to kind of get into the events themselves, Ursula von der Leyen, she said, Europe is ready to step up. She said, we must invest in defense, strengthen our capabilities. We've got to take a proactive approach to security. She said, we're taking decisive action, presenting a roadmap for Readiness 2030 with increased defense spending, important investments in European defense industrial capabilities, and we must buy more European, which means this is going to hurt the U.S. defense industry, because they've had record sales with this war in Ukraine. But guess what? Europe is saying, hey, it's time we spend all that money here in Europe.
Right. No, it really is amazing that Europe, really nation by nation, cannot step up in defense. They'll be forced to form a coalition, an alliance, a union of nations, which they have always tried to do. It's never really come around because the nations are so different from one another. But when they have one big common enemy, as they have now with Russia, which is very foolishly pursuing the type of aggression that it has, really senseless aggression, but that's part of their nature. They can't help it. The Russians, they just can't help themselves to be aggressive, to want to look at Estonia, not as just a friendly country that's on the Baltic seashore, but as something that they want to have. They want to have what they do. And what Estonia has is even better than what's Russia. When Estonia was made an independent country and there were still Russians living there, which there still are, about a third of the country is Russian, the people didn't want to go to Russia because they like the nature of not only the Estonian people, but just the environment and the climate. And that's the thing that's very troubling to me, to see this development.
Europe's not going to have it, right? They're not going to have Russia come in and take Ukraine. They're pretty clear about that. They're pretty clear they want to be involved in any process for peace with Ukraine and Russia, because they're not willing to sell the farm just to have peace at this stage. And they're talking about building an EU-wide market for defense equipment. They're pretty serious about this.
Absolutely. And also, I think that they look upon one thing about the Europeans and even Russia, they look upon Americans as being naive. President Trump is getting a lesson in Russian diplomacy 101 as to how truthful they are and to how they engage in diplomacy. They looked upon the former president as someone who was totally out of touch with reality and very, very simplistic. Barack Obama, and they don't look to Trump as anything better. They look upon him as a businessman who wants only a big cut for himself. That's how they're kind of working him. That's how they're playing him.
Yeah, and it's one thing that people typically don't understand, particularly in the United States, is because many people in the United States, they don't get out and they don't travel much. They're not as familiar with cultures, and everyone, and not just people in the United States, but everyone tends to be a bit ethnocentric. And one of the blessings I've had in my life is to study cultures is actually part of my graduate work. And you go out and you learn about cultures. And what you realize is that people in these other places, they don't think the same way. From childbirth, they're taught to think differently. And but we always assume that everyone thinks the way we do. So if we're going to be honest and we're going to use a defense, use a contract, enter into a contract a certain way, we're going to honor it, right? And we assume that everyone is going to do the same thing, but that's just absolutely not the case. Other cultures, other countries don't necessarily care about those things in the same way, and they come from a different place in negotiating. Their tactics are completely different. And we can sit back and look and say, yeah, look at what this leader's doing or that leader's doing without any understanding whatsoever of what the other side is doing, because we're looking at it from our own perspective and not from theirs. And I think that's the danger here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I don't know if I had said this on a program before, but in my Rotary Club, we had a student exchange program. And interestingly, our club kind of talked to the young lady who was a high school student, probably a senior high school student. And they asked her, how do the Polish people look upon Americans? And I was shocked at this young lady. She says, I think the people in Poland, now she maybe was speaking for the people in general society, think that Americans are stupid. And she didn't really mean it in a harsh way, but our club was just, wow, how can somebody say that? But that's how the people look upon the Americans, as people who just don't have it all together because of their isolation and their further isolationism, that they're not going to have much regard for us. And they just look upon us as people who just hit the jackpot of having a lot of wealth, but not much else.
Right. And it gets into that. You mentioned the isolationist aspect of it, and people just don't understand. They don't see. They don't even look and try to understand the perspective of the larger world, and yet the United States is integrally ingrained in the rest of the world. It cannot stand on its own. It is not able. This is not the world we live in today. The United States cannot be an island. It cannot exist as an island. Our structures are interwoven globally, and the moment we start trying to offend everyone in the world and become isolationists is the moment we will fall as a country.
Well, the world really is very dependent upon one another. We had a presentation one time to a town hall meeting in Indianapolis by the former Prime Minister or President of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk. And he gave kind of a warning of the future. He said, we're going to be living in a world which has much more technology and so many wonderful things, but we're going to be living in a much more dangerous age, much more volatile age, where an incident in one country triggers off a chain of events in another country. And he gave examples of how certain incidences, this was back in the Clinton era, of how there was a rumor, or with the fact that Clinton had an affair there at the White House, and he said that news caused the stock market to dip very, very severely in South Africa. Just incidents like that you wouldn't think would have much effect, he says, but every day we could take a look, how the world reacts. In the first place that it seems to react is the stock market, and then in other ways.
Yeah. And we're spending a little time talking about things in the United States, and we're in the Nordic Baltic Topics podcast here, right? Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time in that part of the world in about 3 months at least. It seems like every year, and so we spend considerable time there. And that's the show is about Europe and about the Nordic Baltic region, but we want our friends everywhere to understand the implications of what's happening here in the United States. That's why we're spending a little bit of time talking about that at the moment. Mm-hmm. But people really need to understand that the actions that are taking place have an impact, and they're going to they not only impact the rest of the world, but because they're impacting the rest of the world, they're going to have an impact in reverse, coming back the other way. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the point I think we're trying to make here. But continuing along here, I want to get into the next part of this Rearm Europe initiative. It's one thing to say it, it's one thing to brand it, which they've done. They've branded it now. They've got a logo. Once you've got a logo, it gets real, right? Mm-hmm. So Rearm Europe is a real thing. But now they've come out with the Readiness 2030 initiative, which is going to enable spending over 800 billion euros structured around the following pillars and in the Rearm Europe process. It's going to unleash the use of public funding in defense at a national level. The Commission has invited member states to activate the national escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, and that's going to provide them additional budgetary space to increase their defense spending. They have a new dedicated instrument for security action for Europe. That's called SAFE, Security Action for Europe. And the Commission will raise up to 150 billion euros on the capital markets to help EU member states rapidly and sustainably, or rather substantially, increase investments in Europe's defense capabilities. And I'm reading this actually from the white paper that they've released on this. It says SAFE will allow member states to immediately and massively scale up their defense investments through common procurement from the European defense industry. So we're talking about sort of a federalized approach here for the European Union and building their military, though they don't really like to use that word. A lot of people are calling for a federalized approach right now. This will contribute to ensuring interoperability, predictability, and reducing costs for a strong European defense industrial base. And then thirdly, they're going to leverage the European Investment Bank, and they're going to mobilize private capital by accelerating the Savings and Investments Union. So right now, the European Investment Bank, they can't, or they haven't been able to fund military things unless they were dual use items, right? But those are being, those guardrails are being lifted, and it's going to allow the European Investment Bank to lend to defense and security projects, unlocking substantial funding for that. And then they have the Savings and Investments Union strategy, which the Commission adopted yesterday, to make it easier to mobilize private savings into more efficient capital markets and channel investments into critical sectors of the economy, like defense, of course, for those who want to invest in them. So they've got a plan, and they're moving forward.
And what's striking about this is that about a year ago or less, people talked about how Europe's economy is a mess, how countries are really stretched, and it seemed like they're not going to be able to do anything. But it seems that when it comes down to defense, war, and security, all of a sudden, kind of an animal rises out of the pit here and seems to find all the means to accomplish what they need.
Yeah, and now they've come out with a white paper for European defense, which I've gone through and read, and it's proposing ways for member states to massively invest in defense, procure defense systems, build up the readiness of the European defense industry over the long run to effectively address these challenges. The white paper outlines the following key lines of action. And I'm just reading this right straight from the paper, right? I'm skipping a little bit here but for brevity, but they want to close capability gaps. They want to support the European defense industry through aggregated demand and increased collaborative procurement, support Ukraine, what they're calling the porcupine. They're referring to it as a porcupine, right? Making it sneaky, something you don't want to mess with. They want to deepen EU-wide defense market, including through simplifying regulations, accelerate the transformation of defense through disruptive innovations like AI and quantum technologies, enhance European readiness for worst-case scenarios by improving military mobility, stockpiling, and strengthening their external borders. And we've got some really interesting things here in a moment about strengthening those external borders. Some things that I find disturbing, we'll talk about momentarily. And of course, they want to strengthen their partnerships with like-minded countries around the world as well. So the white paper goes into a lot of detail. You can look it up on the European Union's site and read it and see all the details there. I'm just kind of giving some highlights. But meanwhile, Kaja Kallas, the High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and who's also Vice President of the European Commission, she stated, the value we add by working together is priceless, gives us a competitive advantage that is unrivaled anywhere in the world. And that was echoed by the former NATO commander. I saw a interview with him recently, and he was talking about, we think of Europe as all these divided nations. And I heard someone kind of ridiculing the idea that Europe could do anything because they're all these tiny little nations. They said, but Europe combined, and he started throwing out the numbers of a combined European force, and they dwarf anything the United States can put together.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. The army, considerably larger. The economic capabilities, considerably larger. I mean, they've got 450 million people over there. They're quite combined, quite larger than the United States. So this is not something to sneeze at. And what's happening is the people in Europe are beginning to realize that as well.
Right. And also they have a nature about them that is different from American nature. If you have forced conscription or anything, you got a lot of legislation and talking and so forth. In Europe now, they're talking about having compulsory conscription, just laying these things down. And it seems like they're going to accomplish them because they said, we got to do this. And the psyche of those people is that they are more attuned to respond to that than people here in this country.
That's right. And another thing that was kind of interesting, the Commissioner for Defense and Space in the European Union, Andreas Kubilius, I might have mispronounced his name, but he had some comments I found very, I found to be kind of disturbing. He says Europe can no longer afford to be a bystander in its own security, which is okay, fine. We must take our defense into our own hands, he said, reinforcing our commitments to collective security and standing firm. This is the part that's concerning, standing firm against those who seek to challenge our sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he talks about, this isn't just about military strength, but readiness, strategic autonomy, and the future of Europe as a global player. Mm-hmm. And I thought those were deliberately chosen words. Well, I know they were put in writing, and officials like this, they don't put these things in writing without deliberately thinking them through and what their implication is, and saying against those who seek to challenge our sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who besides Russia has challenged Europe's sovereignty lately?
Well, how would you answer that?
Well, I know that I know Denmark right now is considering their sovereignty being challenged.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting when you talk about sovereignty being challenged. The one country that I've heard that more from than anybody has been China. Where Deng Xiaoping, in the big speech that he gave to all the delegates, which elected him 100%, he had 100% vote, said, we will not allow anybody in the world to challenge our sovereignty. And I thought, well, no, China, just live and let live, but they bring these things up almost goading other people to become aggressive because they are aggressive. So it's interesting that Europe would make a statement like that. What does it mean? Is it an individual country? And they know that they can't do it on an individual basis. It'll have to be a combined effort. And that's where it's going.
And that's where it's going. And I encourage our listeners to, if they really want to see what we were talking about earlier about the prophetic implications from a biblical perspective of all this. The organization that sponsors the Nordic Baltic Topics podcast has a booklet, and you can find it at ucgeurope.org. That's ucgeurope.org, and it's called the Final Superpower. Mm-hmm. The Final Superpower, and it goes into a lot of what's happening in Europe right now, and what's going to be happening in Europe. And again, that's ucgeurope.org. It's called the Final Superpower. It's there in English language, since we're an English language podcast, but it's being translated right now as we speak into a number of other languages in the Nordic Baltic context. You can also find it in languages in Western Europe and so forth if you want to read it in your own language. But I encourage people to go and view that. And but moving on, something you brought out here today. Roman Sheremeta, is that how we pronounce the name?
Sheremeta.
Sheremeta. Okay,
Mhm.
you've got the tongue for that. So
Okay.
so tell us about this.
Okay, he is a professor of economics at Case Western Reserve University. Very, very smart person. Actually studied economics first at Purdue University here in Indiana, but he's formerly the chairman of the Ukrainian American House and many other organizations. But he has a Facebook page, which is a page. It's where thousands of people follow him, and he gave a scenario of what will happen next after Trump's phone call with Putin. This is heralded as a big, big event, and then he gives a scenario which is probably very, very truthful and very sensible. He says, "I don't want anyone to have illusions or false hopes. So here's what we could expect. First of all, right now, people are realizing that Trump has no regard for Ukraine. I mean, that has been very, very much shown in the way that he treated Zelensky and the way that he would cut off Ukraine's intel just to weaken them. He says to eliminate this obstacle, he first had to ensure that Russia regained control of the Kursk region. Trump deliberately weakened Ukraine so Russia could recapture Kursk, which is very probable. The next step, as described by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is for Trump to reunite with his good friend, the war criminal Putin, and rebuild U.S.-Russia relations. For that to happen, he must either force Ukraine to capitulate, which Ukraine will not accept, or blame Ukraine for refusing peace. And he said, the crazy things that Ukraine caused the war and other things. That's why Trump called Putin to create an excuse. Predictably, Putin will propose unacceptable peace terms at Ukraine's expense, which the things that he's presented have been no big news. I mean, he presented nothing. Trump will then claim Putin is ready for a ceasefire, but when Ukraine rejects the terms, Trump will accuse Ukraine of not wanting peace. So he will scapegoat Ukraine and blame Zelensky for the failure of negotiations. So that's his take on that. And it's just been a very, very sad story of all the killing and everything that's taken place that Trump refers to. But it's the boys who are dying that every day, hundreds and hundreds of them in this war as the politicians duke it out.
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks will look like, okay, yesterday I think 175 Ukrainian soldiers were returned, and I think about 22 more are coming, and they'll look at some of these moves and think, oh, look, see, it's working, and what Trump is doing is great, but this is chess, right? There are going to be moves here and there to keep up the illusion of things, but one thing Putin has clearly shown is he is not willing, particularly, to give up Crimea. He's not willing to give back up the eastern provinces of Ukraine. He's just not going to do it, and he's made no illusion that he's going to do it. And what I believe, this is my opinion. We could be proven wrong, of course, but I think that Trump is just basing his foreign policy in this matter on hopes and wishes rather than on the reality of what's actually being discussed and said by the people involved.
You cannot trust a single word that Putin says. I mean, the Jimmy Carter says, well, we're learning so much about the Russians. And others, have said what we're learning about the Russians. Well, we can just learn to see what they've been like for the last 300-400 years. And we find them to be untrustworthy. We find them to be imperialistic, aggressive towards the people around them. And that's been the whole story. So there's no way to really negotiate. And he does more with sanctions than anything else.
Well, I remember, a week or two ago, or whatever it was, President Trump was up there and he was going on and on and on about how he had such a good relationship with Putin. He was good friends with Putin, and and the whole Hillary Clinton thing, that boy, Putin endured all that with him and all these false accusations against Trump, and they were just buddies. They endured this hazing together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I thought about was a interview, and few years back with Putin, where an American reporter was talking to Putin about some things. I can't even remember the context anymore of what the discussion was, but he said, don't you think that these things are essentially your actions are going to be taken the wrong way, or maybe offensive. They're not very friendly. Talking about his international actions, to people in the United States. And Putin's response is what I want to focus on here. And he said, "I'm not your friend." He said, "I'm the president of Russia."
Mm-hmm.
And very clearly, he says, my job is to look out for the interest of Russia. I am not your friend. I'm the leader of Russia, and that was his perspective on it. So I think President Trump would be good to take note of that.
Yeah, make Russia great again.
Yeah, he has an agenda, right? And he has a worldview. He's looking out for what he believes is in the best interest of Russia, which of course is his expansionist ideologies, which he's doing right now. And you can see it from his perspective. If you stop for a moment and look at it from his perspective, he thinks, "Hey, I'm rescuing." He thinks of himself as a hero. He's rescuing Russian-speaking Slavic people. He's making, like you said, making Russia great again, right? He's going into regions where the people speak Russian, who maybe have some ethnic Russian. He doesn't care how they got there or what borders they lay in. It's his job to go and rescue them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it from his perspective, rather than from a Western perspective, you can see why he's not interested in negotiating the way that the Western leaders want him to.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not going to. But people keep kind of throwing this false hope around while things just continue to deteriorate.
Well, the only thing that
the Ukrainian leaders see this, they understand it.
They know it. They know it very, very well. That's what
they've been a part of that.
Yeah.
They've been a part of that. Yeah. So anyway, interesting. And in relation to that, of course, other nations that have been under the sphere of Russian influence during the Soviet times and so forth are also they're also aware of these tactics, and they're not willing to negotiate. They're not taking things lightly. They're not looking for a peace process to just solve everything and a ceasefire to just solve all the problems. Poland, for instance, and you made allusion to this a little earlier, but Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced that his country is preparing large-scale military training for every adult male in Poland. According to the BBC, Tusk said that the Ukrainian army has 800,000 soldiers, and Russia has about 1.3 million. So Tusk wants to increase the size of the Polish army, including reservists, to 500,000 from about 200,000 now, which of course would even the odds, right? He's looking at that thinking, well, 800,000 Ukrainians, 500,000 Polish. We're equaling the size of the Russian army. And Tusk said women may also undergo military training, but he believes war is still the greater extent the domain of men. But Poland's also examining France's proposal to include Europe under its nuclear umbrella, and is planning to increase its own defense spending to 5% of GDP, far more than what we spend in the United States. Interestingly, we talk about what people think. Can you imagine if the United States suddenly said compulsory military training for every man? Mm-hmm. What would the outcry be in the United States? And yet they just did a poll in Poland to see what Poles think about compulsory military training and whether it should be introduced. It was conducted by the Institute for Market and Social Research for one of Poland's leading daily news outlets, and 55% of the population was in favor, with 21.9% saying definitely, absolutely yes. Another 33.1% saying, yeah, probably we should do that. So about 55% of the population was in support. Only about 8.5% said definitely not, with another 27.3 saying probably we shouldn't do that. And the remaining were just unsure. So a different mindset that Western leaders don't tend to understand.
No, they don't. Just this was a similar state of affairs in World War II, where we have to take action, we have to do something, and people got excited. They were enlisting in record numbers. World War I was that way too. We've got to go over there, over there. We've got to fight these. You got to fight, the Kaiser or whoever.
We have Western leaders who are, and when I say Western leaders, I think the only one here, of course, is President Trump. So I should say President Trump and not say Western leaders. But, he thinks a ceasefire is going to be the solution to everything, and it's going to lead to all this peace. But when we look at the people in Eastern Europe, the Ukrainians, the Poles, the people who've lived under this influence, they don't see that as peace. They understand the occupation, and that's something that people, I think, in the United States who are supporting Trump particularly don't realize. They think, oh, well, peace is a great thing, a ceasefire is a great thing, no one's dying. But over in places like Poland and Ukraine, people are literally signing up to die in order to prevent being occupied by Russia, because they understand what that means. They grew up in that system. They knew that system. They were familiar with it, and they don't want to be a part of it. They don't want to have anything to do with it, and they're literally willing to go and die rather than accept a ceasefire that's going to put these onerous things on them, and then allow for a future attack from Russia.
James, I talk Ukraine quite often to the people that we help and support. We do have good communications, and I'm just amazed as to how strong they are in the way that they talk. Here their town is bombed. A cruise missile, hits them, 1 kilometer away from them, and they're just strong. They're sweeping up the sidewalks, from the glass. They have these patriotic poems given by little children who sing, our soldiers are going to do this. And I'm just amazed. I'm just moved with emotion when I see these people and the strength that they have. They're not afraid. Well, I'm sure they are afraid, but I mean, they are very, very strong and brave in the way they come across. And this is where thousands of their population have died in this war.
Yeah, that's right. And yet they do it willingly, because they know what's at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy for President Trump, sitting thousands of miles away, to and not understanding the culture and not understanding the history. Apparently, it's easy for him to say, "Well, we just have to have a ceasefire, and you just have to give everything up in order to make peace." Whenever you don't have to deal with it day in and day out, that's easy to say. But I think the actions of the people who are involved over there speaks more loudly.
Well, sustainable peace does not come through negotiations. That's only a ceasefire, and it'll be only a temporary thing. But we, in our program, one of our taglines is that we are talking about a sustainable future. The things that we preach and the things that we do talk about how things will be long-term rather than how we'll stop or put a Band-Aid on a problem.
Right. And another country over there that's affected in the Baltics, Estonia, which we spend a lot of time in, and in fact, I'll be traveling to Estonia here in the coming days. They've announced this week that they'll be increasing their own defense spending to 5% of GDP, and not only that, but they're going to be working to develop deep strike capabilities and electronic warfare. Because I think they've seen, while Ukraine has done quite a job in defending itself, one thing they have lacked is any significant deep strike capabilities to fight back, and to make Russia really regret doing what they've done. And Estonia is learning from that, and they're saying, we need deep strike capabilities, because they truly fear that they will be next on the list.
Well, Estonia has some of the most brilliant computer technicians of all. I mean, they're leaders in the world in that way. And deep strike for them is not that far off. I mean, they're 3-hour car drive from Leningrad, or St. Petersburg, I should say. They're very much on the border of Russia. And our office over there, is 40 miles as the crow flies from Russia.
Yeah, and Tartu, yeah. So they're on a military footing. They're on a war footing over there, no doubt about it. and a peaceful place, a great place to go visit. But the leadership is not taking for granted that everything is going to be roses from here on out. They are preparing.
Mm-hmm.
Something else significant that took place yesterday. Finnish President Alexander Stubb had President Zelensky and his country and awarded the Great Cross, which is quite significant, with a chain or a collar of Finland's white rose with the words for the struggle for independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. So basically what the Great Cross is here, this refers to the Grand Cross with a collar of the Order of the White Rose of Finland. It's the highest distinction in the country, or the highest decoration in the country, and it's reserved primarily for heads of state, but it can also be given to others of exceptional service. And since 1919, so for over 100 years, less than 100 people have ever received this honor.
Mm-hmm.
And Stubb noted that Finland and Ukraine have a lot in common, and they do, because they've both been, in the sights of Russia. And he says, we are members of the European family. And that's the way he phrased it. We are both members of the European family. And we share the experience of defending our independence. And meanwhile, Prime Minister Petteri Orpo, he met with Zelensky and reiterated that, quote, it is not possible to negotiate about Ukraine without Ukraine, nor about Europe without Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So they see themselves as part of the negotiation, right? They see themselves as part of the same European family. And so when you're negotiating about Ukraine, you're negotiating about Europe, is the way they look at it. And you can't negotiate about Europe without Europe. So interesting perspective, and a high honor bestowed upon Zelensky, because the Europeans simply do not see him the way that he's been painted by President Trump at all.
No, it got off at a bad start where Europe and Ukraine were excluded from the discussions that Trump wanted with Putin. Trump wanted to talk to the top guy instead of bringing everybody in and to get everybody to talking. And I know that Putin, I can't imagine just how much he has derided, or he has frankly laughed about the way that this whole thing has come about. He's just sitting there just gloating with the successes that he's had from people who want to appeal to the higher nature of man. Putin has no higher nature, so there's nothing to appeal. There's nothing, zero.
Well, and there's blame to go around on all sides. There always is, and there will be people who will point to things that Ukraine has done, and things that they feel Russia was justified in some of its actions, and there'll be things that they look at the United States and they look at the West, and say Western leaders want certain things, so they're allowing certain things and setting up certain things. There's plenty of conspiracy theories to go around about every side, and there's probably truth in all of it. And we're not really making judgment about any of those things one way or the other. We're looking at what's happening, what the facts on the ground are, and how it plays into what biblical prophecy says is going to happen. And we're looking at things that are happening right before our eyes, and just not making judgments about what people's motivations were to get here, but at the reality that we're facing and the conflicts it's causing in the world. So whatever side you fall on some of these issues politically, or just in your opinion, or whatever the case might be, the facts are the facts, and this is the world we're in, and this is what the leaders are saying. These are the actions that are taking place, and that's what we're trying to make note of here, so everyone's aware, and people can prepare for what is potentially ahead. And
we're trying to present a story, a narrative to you of what's going on. And then we are also trying to prepare a narrative of what we should be thinking and what we should be doing. That's part of the preaching the gospel for a more sustainable world.
Exactly. And as for this relationship between Finland and Zelensky, it goes deeper. He accompanied President Stubb to the largest shelter in Helsinki, which can accommodate 6,000 people. and noted that Finland has very good experience in building civil shelters. So the countries signed a document while he was there yesterday with intent that launches the establishment of a civil protection shelter coalition. And Ukraine is working to increase the number of safe places and shelters in their state, Zelensky said. So the coalition that they're creating will be led by Finland, and it's going to be working on mobilizing international partners to support the construction of shelters across Ukraine. So this gets in a little bit to what Trump, I think, was trying to do, initially saying, well, we're going to stop. We're going to stop the war because we're going to go in and we're going to send our own people in to mine in Ukraine, and then Russia better not attack, because if he attacks Americans in Ukraine, then boy, that's going to have consequences. And it looks like this might be Europe saying, hey, we're going to send people into Ukraine. We're going to be building. We're going to be leading construction efforts to protect and preserve, and putting our people in harm's way. So that relationship.
Yesterday Trump was saying he'd like to take over the power plants. Sort of like the rare earth minerals. He wants to now, I don't know, acquire the power plants, I guess, which would require Americans to maintain them and to put Americans, on the ground there. So I'm not sure what the thinking is totally.
Well, yeah, and if you're Ukrainian, you're probably thinking, and what's next? I mean, we're trying to defend our homeland against Russia, and the United States wants to take it over in the guise of defending us. So, I mean, it certainly looks like opportunism rather than friendship. And despite the claims of political leaders out of Washington, Europe, isn't getting repaid for their investment there. They're investing in their own security, and so yeah, a lot of things, a lot of misinformation around that subject and around those issues. But we mentioned earlier about how Europe is really working to increase their border security, and I said, there's some things that are happening that are concerning to me about that. Here's part of that. Iveco Salina, Prime Minister of the Republic of Latvia, announced this week that her country, and not Latvia alone, but also Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland, so all three Baltic states and Poland, are beginning the process of withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention. Now, for those not familiar with the Ottawa Convention, that's the convention that bans the use of anti-personnel landmines. So the landmines are being used right now on the border with Ukraine and Russia. And in fact, I know someone I know someone personally from Ukraine whose brother just a few weeks ago lost his leg to a landmine while defending Ukraine against Russia. And these landmines, they don't remember where they all are. And these things will stay in the ground. And even after the war is over, they will continue to kill people. That's why people agreed a long time ago, hey, the use of landmines is really not wise. But here we see those on the eastern flank of Europe, the countries saying, you know what, it's time for us to put landmines on our border. So they're withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention. Poland is taking an additional step, and they're considering withdrawing from the Dublin Convention, which bans the use of cluster munitions. So, and again, I said at the beginning, I looked at this, how Trump treated Zelensky in the White House, and said, this is going to be a moment, a sea change moment, right? And the result is, and all of this is stemmed from that. Every bit of this stemmed from that event. And the result is the world is now unsafer, and it's getting more and more unsafe. And we're unwinding years of progress, and going back to finding more efficient and effective ways to kill each other as a result.
Yep. It's I know that we work with a Ukrainian farming nonprofit, and one of their big troubles that they had for production of wheat was down so much last year was not just the war, but just the fact that they can't go into these fields because of the mines. And that's going to be a problem even after the war, where they'll have to clean that area up. They'll have to go through with minesweepers, slowing everything down. It just slows everything down, besides the danger of explosion.
And it just will be for a long time. And the people who a lot of times the people who find these landmines that are left over are children. Because they're the ones that get out and run around and play, and like you say, farmers and people who have no interest in the war whatsoever. Those are the ones who are going to suffer from these types of things. So sad to see that. Meanwhile, Europe is also increasing their digital capability. In fact, Digital EU, which stands for the Digital Europe Program, has announced 6 newly selected AI factories this month that'll be hosted in Austria, Bulgaria, France, Germany, Poland, and Slovenia. So, I mean, this is a European-wide project. And together with the first selection back in December, where they selected 7 AI factories, 2 of which, of course, are in Nordic region. We have Finland and Sweden. These hubs foster innovation, collaboration, and development in the field of artificial intelligence, and will bring the key ingredients for AI innovation: computing power, data, and talent. That's what they're looking to develop. Powered by EU's network of supercomputers, it says AI factories will unlock the potential of artificial intelligence in Europe with an overall budget of about 8.1 billion euros. Digital EU, sometimes referred to with the acronym DIGITAL, provides strategic funding. It supports projects in key capacity areas like supercomputing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, advanced digital skills, and ensuring a wide use of digital technologies across the economy and society. And of course, we already saw earlier, one of the things they're looking to develop for military capacity is they're looking to develop cyber warfare as well. And this will all, of course, pave the way for that. One of the locations chosen back in December was in Finland, where you can find Lumi, Lumi, which means snow in Finland. But Lumi is actually the most powerful supercomputer in Europe, one of the fastest supercomputers in the world that's being used in this initiative. So Europe is really broadening the scope of what they're doing and increasing their capabilities across the board.
Well, what's happening digitally around the world is so exciting. I love it. I mean, I love using it, but then we wonder what its ultimate capabilities will be.
Indeed, we're seeing the world change in its use of technology, and while it has so much potential for good things, and it really does, and I'm sure that this will be used for a lot of good, a lot of great things for Europe, and they are not backwards digitally, for sure. For people in the rest of the world who might listen to this, Europe is really at the forefront of digital development, but it also has the potential for use in warfare and other things, and I'm sure we'll see that part of the development as well in the coming years.
Well, in the way that it affects satellites, the way it's global, how it can really wreck everything. So somebody can have the ultimate bomb, which is not nuclear, but an electronic bomb that'll just bring this world back to the Stone Age.
It will. In some countries in Europe, while they're advancing things digitally, have realized that this is not the solution to everything, and that it does create vulnerabilities. In fact, I believe it's Sweden just recently started encouraging their citizens who have kind of transitioned to a digital economy and digital currency. I mean, they really don't use much cash anymore. And they've said, you know what, everyone needs to stockpile cash, because in wartime, and they're anticipating it, in wartime, digital economy might not work. So stockpile cash. So it's got its advantages and its disadvantages, I guess, like everything else. But on to some we've talked about some pretty heavy things. Let's get into some lighter things here. I always like to kind of conclude on a lighter note to keep our perspective that not all in the world is bad, though we talk about some pretty heavy things and where they're headed. But you ever thought about just breathing good, fresh, clean air?
Mm.
I was out yesterday and walking, and it was a very moderate day where I am, and there was a nice breeze out, and the breeze just kind of cleared everything out, and it was cool but not cold, and it just felt good to breathe. And well, according to Europe magazine, you need to move to Iceland or Estonia. Only these two European countries met the World Health Organization's guidelines for tiny toxic particles known as PM2.5 last year. And according to an analysis from the Swiss air quality technology company IQ Air. PM 2.5 comes from sources like the combustion of fossil fuels, dust storms, wildfires, things of that nature. In 14 countries in Europe showed an increase in those little particulates. It's so tiny it can pass right through your body's natural defenses and get straight into your lungs and your bloodstream. So it's not a good thing. But the smallest levels were found in Iceland and Estonia. So I mentioned earlier, I'll be traveling there. I'm looking forward to breathing in that nice, clean Estonian air. But also for our Nordic Baltic listeners, they'll be pleased to know that not only Iceland and Estonia, who are the top two, have the good clean air, but number 3 was Finland and number 4 was Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
So they rounded out the Nordic Baltic countries, rounded out the top 4 slots with the cleanest air, followed by Ireland, and then at 6th place was Norway. So the Nordic Baltic region has really taken care of that and benefits from being able to breathe in that air. And I know they're very active up in that part of the world, so I know they appreciate that.
Right. Norway is such a beautiful country mountain-wise. Finland is so beautiful with all the lakes. I love Estonia. It's flat, but I still love the forests. They are beautiful areas, and clean air is certainly a great blessing. I've just started biking here, and I just enjoy going out and just having my lungs fill up with good, clean air after a long winter.
Well, and I guess we could say for our Nordic Baltic friends that they're literally a breath of fresh air. So
yeah.
And then one final thing, just to kind of get us out of here. The 100th anniversary was celebrated in Norway, and this is a special celebration, a special anniversary of an invention that we want to bring up because it's totally probably irrelevant to many parts of the world, but it's essential in Norway. And if you've been to Norway, you'd know it. It's the cheese slicer. Mm. And its inventor got frustrated 100 years ago by being unable to get a thin slice of Norwegian brown cheese. And it is kind of tough, right? It'll break off. You get big chunks or whatever. But he had experience with carpentry, and he looked at the carpentry planer and drew his inspiration. And now we have the cheese slicer.
Well, that's very wonderful.
Yeah. So the slicers help Norwegians cut thinner slices in thick and thin times, and it makes the cheese last longer. And it's kept on. And I know Norwegians really appreciate it. They travel with them, and if you've never seen one, it's an interesting little device. When you first see the cheese slicer, you kind of wonder what in the world is this contraption. But it does its job effectively, and it's been around for 100 years. So,
well, we had one given to us, and I couldn't figure out how to use it. I think we lost it somewhere. But anyway, I know I had trouble using it the first time.
Well, if you like cheese, and especially if you like to get the big block cheese, you need a cheese slicer. So so if you don't know what we're talking about, go on and look it up and order you one, and you'll have a little piece of Norway history in your home. What better time? So, all right. Well, I think that's enough. We've covered a lot of ground here, as always. Victor, it's so good to have you with us. What you got coming up on the Cubic Report?
Well, on the Cubic Report, I've got a book that I'm going to be talking about, written by Gary Petty, called Christendom, talking about the kingdom of God and how Christianity, how how Christianity changed the meaning of the kingdom of God. So I'm looking forward to interviewing him. Also, I'll be interviewing Bruce Brill, who worked with the NSA, and he's going to talk about, he was very much involved with the Yom Kippur War in 1973. He'll talk about some things from that. And tomorrow, I have a podcast with consultant Greg Thomas. We'll be talking about EQ, emotional quotient in leadership. So that's what's coming up this week.
All right, very good. And until next time, I'm James Ginn for Victor Kubik and the Nordic Baltic Topics News Roundup.